Blessed love and peace. We back at it. A follow up from the previous joint of yesterday. Um, I mentioned the appearance of the United States of America in the process of committing self euthanasia, committing suicide, and literally, but also macroically. Um, and doesn't mean everybody dies. And again, first, not wishing this, observing this, so that we can help and heal and optimally prevent harm and pain. So, and again, it's not a matter of everybody dying or whatever else, but the society, the culture, um, practicing it to the point of dissolution. So, a further consideration amidst this is that when we look at the further details um, of the experience and the actuality, um, and the the explicit self-affliction, what is observed within these details is that rather than necessarily the populace being the decision makers and initiators of this process of self euthanasia, such kinfolk, well, I'll put it like this: it is there is increasing indication that it is the plutocratic cults, the plutocratic American cults that are referenced within the previous joint. The plutocratic American cults that are committing suicide and that are self euthanizing. And extending that act of self-affliction and self euthanasia uh, to the reaches of its influence, or the respective collective influences of the plutocratic cults. um, and that it's beneficial to recognize that, because it's not just a matter of like people, like regular common people, um, just doing stuff. It's a matter of, and I should put it like this: it's not a matter of regular common people intending to do self harm or even necessarily harm to others, but particularly self harm. But those who are committing self harm, by and large, are doing it because of being under the influence of the plutocratic cults. And that might seem like shirking the responsibility and otherwise, but it's a matter of observing and recognizing the relationships, the influence, the hierarchies, the experiences of subordination, and further. So, but that's the articulation at the moment, that it's the Pluto. There is further observance and recognition that it is increasingly and primarily the plutocratic American cults that are in the process of self self euthanizing, committing suicide, dissolving, and manifesting that process in the further reaches of those influences, in that go further into the ordinary experiences of American society and global society. Similar to, like the specific historic cult experiences that are referenced in part uno of this joint, the most recent joint. Um, so that's the basic consideration here at the moment. Following up from the previous joint, uh, the intention is not to antagonize, the intention is not to vilify, the intention is not to call anything evil or anyone evil. Everyone is a child of the Most High. Everyone has the presence of the divine truth of the Most High within each person. There is divine purpose within the life of each being. So the purpose is not to condemn anyone or to target anyone for harm or otherwise. The purpose of this is to simply recognize, understand, and respond to the conditions in an optimally altruistic and healing and benevolent, compassionate way. And we can only do that when we are honest, when we are painfully truthful and courageous to be painfully truthful. So we invite the conversation, um, the yays and the nays, and then further the doings. So it's beneficial to recognize that the precipitators, like the earthly precipitators of this process of self-euthanasia, are seem to be primarily the plutocratic American cults. Again, it's a matter of the cults running out of any place else to go, the bottom falling out, experiencing an absence of um, the ability of continuing in the same particular way, just like with the previous cults. The walls closing in and thus hitting panic mode and self-destruction. All right. When I discussed yesterday in the previous day, the self-affliction, seeing municipalities cutting down trees, the destruction of the environment, the woeful pollution of natural waters to the point of it being illegal to touch streams, natural flowing streams. That's all evidence of self-affliction, and the earthly responsibility of that, it rests primarily within those in the positions of government, and recognizing that government is essentially controlled by the plutocratic cults. There's that recognition of cause and effect, um, and it being other than a callous kind of indifference towards the environment. It getting increasingly towards, again, like I said, a panic situation of not having a solution for continuing the indulgences and luxuries and coercions and manipulations, and additionally, as it's done within recent generations. Um, Another consideration within this is just how things are done within government. And as I mentioned before, there being a stagnancy, particularly within the United States, over 300 million people. Um, there being a stagnancy of doing something substantially different or change or even responding to what the needs are. Just the process of making laws, the notion, the mere suggestion, the notion that lawmakers can be elected and get acclimated at the state level, at the local level, at the federal level, get acclimated and knowledgeable within a period of a year or 2 years as a representative, and then have to be reelected again. What 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 effective laws can that person make? And then there's the accusation of those who stay in office for multiple terms of being corrupted by the politics and everything else like that. So, but just looking at the mechanics of like what kind of laws can be made, what kind of practical laws can be made as it is presented at this moment, as the system is presented. So, there's very little, and particularly when there's a disagreement and this, that, and the other, the way things are done are through the quiet back doors, and additionally, and that's where the plutocratic cults um, make the calls, and how do plutocratic cults that are different from each other and vying for control and power and influence amongst each other, how do such kinfolk decide how these decisions are made? It's a murky area, and we can recognize um, there being a multitude of processes through which those decisions are made, much like warfare. And additionally, but what is evidenced is that many of the decisions of government that actually do things are straight and narrow um, command type decisions that are made outside of the formal public processes, and those decisions emanating, being derived earthly from ubiquitous, nondescript sources, with perhaps multitude of agencies and intermediaries, and additionally. So, um, when those decisions of self affliction, cutting down the trees, allowing waters to be polluted to the point of killing people, and further, um, those are those are decisions that don't stop at the office of the president of the United States. It stops at the plutocratic cults that are calling the earthly shots. So when those plutocratic American cults find difficulty in that paradigm of expansion, that economic paradigm of growth, and being able to control the conditions of that growth globally, um, because essentially, effectively, just naturally, to control the economic growth of a global economy requires having a proficient knowledge about other civilizations and cultures, of how to work with other people from other civilizations and culture, and how to even manipulate, coerce that behavior of other people. You can't just rely upon a puppet potentates. And additionally, you have to have a knowledge. That means having knowledge about the language. And additionally, and when people have a knowledge of an effective knowledge about other cultures, people are immersed and obligated to those cultures, and no longer um, aligned with the homogenous um, allegiances and oaths and pledges and everything else like that that are um, that are described within the plutocratic cult. So um, that's part of the phenomena that the cults are experiencing in terms of trying to grab and hold on to the entirety of the earth, or even just like the predominant um, points of interest of the earth. And meanwhile, the competition is surrounding, and there's plutocratic cults from around the world: China, India, Africa, Middle East, native heritage, native kinfolk, Europe, further. So it's like it's a continual, it's a nasty game, and it's okay. That's the challenge that is being experienced, and from that challenge, we are seeing the effects, the essential panic, and it's showing itself increasingly. And that's evidence of the lack of discipline, because the modus operandi is extremely subtle, even subliminal, not to be evidenced, because that gives people motivation of calling it out and responding to it, and undoing it, at least to a certain extent. So when it is increasingly evidenced, um, that is when it is increasingly evidence observed, um, that is evidence of it, of the weakness of it weakening. So, um, and earthly games are finite. There's a limit to the effectiveness. Um, so that is some consideration with regards to that. Um, there is the concept of, I mentioned before, the notion of economic growth, and that's something we can call it Keynesian. And I'm just throwing out that word because that's what people talk about when they talk about modern, postmodern economics. Was it John Maynard Keynes? I study economics, but the what's interesting is that when I study economics as an 18 and 19-year-old, a lot of the basic premises, a lot of the basic principles that are presumed as given, actually are rather contradictory to things that I'm taught growing up. Um, but again, 18, 19 years old, we can't question our professors. We can't question. This is the textbook. It has to be that way. I'm at HBCU. Where else am I going to find authenticity in respect of this topic? So, the point for that is that Keynesian, Smainesian, with all due respect to Keynes and um, Bentham and Adam Smith and Autumn Brethren and Sistren, um, there's this process. It's just a basic premise, um, perspective of just like grabbing as much as one can, and all the mechanics of the economy based upon that notion of grabbing as much as one can. If one finds a new way of doing something that's faster, and puts out further production, then that's further growth. Um, and so, um, the national economies, businesses, and all the different economic entities are judged based upon how much each one is able to produce, whether it's factory products, whether it's finance or otherwise. So that's that notion of growth. And if something is not growing as much as another thing, it's eaten up or otherwise. It's looked at as inefficient. If this place is not reaping as much as it can from the land, whether it's agriculture, whether it's mining or otherwise, then it's eaten up and something else is done with it, or somebody else who can reap further from it, it takes over. So that's the basic notion of growth. Um, and again, businesses are built, corporations are established, industries are built, jobs are provided, houses are built, neighborhoods are built, roads and infrastructure are built, all based upon these practices of economic growth, and that can be very effective, like it is within the United States over the past century, when there is a lot of space for that growth. But when there is a stack, and then also technology has a way of augmenting that experience of perceived growth. In actuality, it's just, well, I'll leave that aside for a moment. So that's what the United States experiences significantly over the past century, over this notion of growth, growth, growth. But there's a wall that is being hit, literally in terms of the limits of reaping from the earth, um, and recognition that a lot of the high productivity in agriculture, factory products, and dishing is actually harmful. The products that are being made are cheap, are harmful for the environment, are harmful for people's health, and so even though there's this increased productivity, this economic growth, and people are buying it, people are getting jobs from it, and additionally, it's causing a lot of harm. It's causing a lot of um, uh, health detriments, environmental detriments, social detriments, and further. A lot of the advancements in terms of economic growth, perceived growth, is in the technology front, particularly telecommunications, and additionally. But even then, it's simply a matter of enabling people to do what people do for millions, for thousands of years: talk with each other, build relationships. Yes, people are living distant, comparatively speaking, from each other, compared to previous generations, and so that's what this facilitates. However, um, in terms of value added development, there's again a stagnancy. So that's part of the challenge that the plutocratic cults are experiencing, because again, people's motivation for working, people's efficacy in being pacified, and further are predicated upon these premises of productivity. The whole class disparity and the motivations within that disparity, the carrot and the stick, are predicated upon these notions, and so um, that's part of the challenge. What is observed at this moment is that that paradigm of economic growth is antiquated. It's obsolete. There is a continuing evolution, just as that the dissolution of the plutocratic American cults does not mean the dissolution of all cults or even all American plutocratic cults. It's the process of evolution, and in that process of evolution, many fall by the wayside, and some continue on. Some evolve and adapt and change, and there's that element of it as well. Same thing with the economy, the global economy. Same thing for all the cults around the world, and same thing for the global economy. So the notion of growth, of technology advancement, of knowing, of continuing to find quicker, faster, bigger, further productive ways of doing things continues. It's natural. It's part of the human nature. But at the same time, um, what is observed is so we can look. Well, what is observed is that within reaching a certain threshold, that productivity, that avenue for economic growth and advancement, innovation, is increasingly narrow, particularly within technology, telecommunications, um, computer science. There's a lot of stuff going on at the moment with pharmaceuticals, chemical engineering, bioengineering, and additionally, but a lot of that is actually just elements of warfare. Um, and so the increasingly benign, productive type of technology innovation, um, I'll just describe it like this. Rather than there being a wide prospect of economic growth in all different types of industries, factory, agriculture, and additionally, there's the recognition of there being a further prospect of further growth uh, in the near long term. By that I mean like within the next few generations at least, specifically within specific types of technology. Um, and so that is what can be seen as the economic progression for those who are progressive in economic terms. But at the same time, there's the recognition of the tremendous benefit in economic regression. And that's a bad word oftentimes in economic parlance, because again, that's describing a deficiency, a lack of productivity, and that is perceived um, historically as a weakness, as a vulnerability, as a target for being taken over. However, what we recognize pervasively around the world, and particularly within postmodern society and civilization, is that the value of regressive economics. And so, by regressive economics, we're talking about doing things the old fashioned way, and recognizing that doing things the old fashioned way is increasingly healthy, it's increasingly enduring, it's increasingly um, accessible. So, a very strong example of that is organic agriculture. That's doing things the old fashioned way. Growing plants, growing produce, growing fruits and vegetables without chemicals, without fertilizers, without pesticides, without all those other things that cause people things like cancer, and other diseases, so called allergies, and further. So, we see the tremendous value over the past few decades, the past few generations, how extremely valued organic agriculture is. Now we have whole industries, whole foods being established that offer these products at a very high premium. Organic agriculture is further expensive to produce, but even further than that, now there's a socioeconomic elitism that's connected with organic agriculture. So now it's the elitist thing to do within conventional hierarchy to get organic agriculture, rather than the main brand, multi-billion-dollar brand companies that spend so much in mass marketing and distribution. In addition, because that's perceived increasingly as plebeian, whereby just a few generations ago, those what were the go-to things for social inclusion within middle income upper middle income social circles. Now it's a matter of the healthier things, the regressive economic product of organic agriculture. So that's one example. We can find that value of regressive economics in other in other experiences of human behavior and the economic activity connected with that human behavior. Um, some of it is maybe somewhat tenuous, but I mentioned eco villages in a somewhat challenging way in the previous joint. But that's another example, and it might seem again like an offshoot kind of um, marginal type of pursuit, but it is growing. It is increasingly normalized over the past few generations. Maybe there's been waxing and waning over the past decade or two, um, but there is an increasing value for doing things and living in a way that is increasingly simple and healthy and enduring. So the whole point of this is to recognize the benefit of that at the micro levels, and to um, account for that. To it That's the natural progression, um, and so it's not a matter of allowing it to happen. We could even call it, even saying to facilitate it happening, is a misnomer. But it's a matter of recognizing the legitimacy of that, and organizing the human institutions and systems to facilitate, to account for these preferences amongst the peoples. So, for those who have an interest in the progressive economy, high technology, and additionally, I mean, the way that growth is, what people who have the vision for that show is, rather than necessarily even in the mainstream society, the high tech, the way advanced technology, and being invested and um, residing physically in terms of living spaces, and additionally on Mars and other planets, in remote places away from the regularity of civilization. And so we can also recognize that there are many people, there are a fair number of people who have an interest in that, but it's at the same time a very small percentage of the current human population of Earth. And so there's validity within that, there's legitimacy within that, even as a way of simply um, encouraging and accounting for people's vision to progress in that way. So there's truth within that. But at the same time, that to expect and to impose that upon the entirety of humanity is a fallacy, and that there's a significant amount of dissonance in that prospect and endeavor, even in, well, I'm gonna just leave it at that. So the what is recognized as the increasingly harmonious balance is to welcome that progression the um, of technology development, and additionally, and at the same time to welcome the regressive economics, and to support, to acknowledge, respect, support the collectives that have the preference and the prerogative to live, to settle, to work, um, to trade in an increasingly modest technological experience. So, one example to describe like some tangibility of that is to identify basically three collectives within the aggregate of all billions of human beings, 7 billion, or however many there are, or how many there are estimated. So three basic collectives. One being collectives that live in a way that exists before electricity. So for those who just want to live like bare bones, back to the ancestor type of stuff, even just a few centuries ago, living that way, and there being entire regions of the earth, multiple what are now known as nations, areas of multiple nations, like large portions of continents being designated as these areas where people live. The norm is for people to live in conditions that are pre-electricity, and pre-electricity again being about 200 years ago. Um, that's one category. Then the next category is people who choose to live in a way that it exists before smartphones. So just a couple, a decade and a half ago. So that includes having internet access, being able to go online, even being able to get social media, but just not doing it on a smartphone. And continuing, still can have a mobile phone, still make calls, and additionally still go on, like I said, Skype, Zoom, all them joints. But well, yeah, that allow for access without a smartphone. But just live that way. All the technology, additionally, any non smartphone technology also that is established after the smartphone is invented. So whether it's self-driving cars or other anything else that's established since that time, 15 years ago, that is prohibited or that is excluded from those collectives that choose to live in a way of conditions before the smartphone is um, available to the public. So that's the second category. And then the third category is people who choose to live in a way that has the technology that's available since the smartphone. And so, again, all the new advances of technology, space travel, colonization of planets, and additionally, that's for the people who choose to live in that way. And so those designations are formal and effectively and basically life decisions, just like being a national citizen. Except at this point, it's not a matter of being a citizen of a nation; it's a matter of being a practitioner of a lifestyle. Um, and there it is. And then people residing in a certain space that's designated for that thing, and there can be colonies or there can be reserves like within a region that is pre-electricity. There can be a metropolitan area that's just um, pre-smartphone or other. I mean, there's ways of adapting to that, so it's not just some complete apartheid type of situation, but um, the general framework is having these designated regions along these lines, and people residing along those lines accordingly. And there's a propensity of people changing their minds and making decisions, just like people change their minds for going being citizen from one place to another place. But it involves that type of um, uh, scrutiny to do that. If people can get married with people from another collective or whatever, but again, people have to decide where they're going to live, and one converting to the lifestyle of the other. So, but in that scenario, there is an accounting and a respect and a support and a harmony amongst people's different inclinations, and that's across the different ethnic, religious, even class divides. So, um, again, it's a matter of recognizing the truth and the benefits that exist within progressive economics, and that continuing endeavor for innovation and advancement in technology, uh, and then also the benefit that exists within regressive economics, doing things in the plain old fashioned, simple, hands in the ground, um, direct connection with people and relationship with the elements kind of experience. Um, and uh, there being protection. So, um, just like with animals, like when we have endangered species and when we have animal reserves, to think about people in that same context sounds like dehumanizing, literally, and whatever. But at the same time, it's beneficial to recognize that that's where we are at this point. So, for those collectives that decide to live in a way that is pre-electricity, they can't have Gatling guns or advanced weaponry and otherwise, and so thus are increasingly vulnerable, and thus there is warranted due protections of people who live in such a way, for those regions that such a way, just like as there are no nuclear zones at this moment on this earth. Similarly, now it can be we to compare things to the way things are at this moment is a dubious endeavor, because there are all different types of conservations. Like there's just so much scheming in why things are the way they are at the moment. So it's a little bit, would be somewhat naive just to say, oh, it's just like this, without recognizing that, well, this is just the consequence of imperialism. But still, there's something that is recognized in the benefit of designating certain areas as a non-militaristic, non-competitive zone, and it being respected by those who do have those advanced weaponries. And additionally, and if whenever there is the threat or experience of a violation of that compact, then those collectives with the advanced weaponry are called upon to address it accordingly. Um, and again, that expectation might also sound somewhat naive, but um, we have to step on faith at some point. We have to step on trust, um, and principle, and holding people accountable, and recognition of higher powers that be. So um, that's where that leads to at the moment. Um, so, anyways, the three different zones: regressive economics, progressive economics. Um, Recognizing that uh, when we talk about the powers that be, when we talk about the plutocracies, when we talk about the Illuminati and whatever else, one thing that's beneficial for people to recognize is that, well, all right, well, yeah. Before I get into this part, it's beneficial for me to articulate something else at the moment. What is beneficial to recognize, I mentioned before, like the notion of going back to that observation of the self euthanasia of society, and it being precipitated by plutocratic cults. What is appropriate, that is beneficial to recognize, as I said before, um, and to recognize the nuance and the specificity of that, the cause and effect. Now, at the same time, as I've said continually, is that we can't blame anybody else. We can't blame the plutocratic cults for the conditions. And additionally, we can recognize that it may precipitate in an earthly sense, but we have to recognize what we ourselves are doing to allow to cause the plutocratic cults to be discouraged into such conditions. So all continually, ultimately, the buck stops with ourselves. In that respect, when we look at how the plutocratic cults are manifesting these adverse conditions, it's through the intermediaries of the populace, of regular people, in the hierarchies, from the bosses to the middle bosses to the people on the ground, and additionally. And what is observed is that it can be very difficult for people to have proper control of what people are doing. People, many people are within the significant influence, threat, fear, contract, obligation, debt to other entities, and it's through these auspices that much of this harm is being manifested. People can obey these adverse orders begrudgingly. People can obey the adverse orders um, with vigor, um, but it can be difficult. So, for those who do have resistance, and there are different levels of like self determination. There's different levels of like individual will, or not even individual, but like benevolent will, and um, that benevolent will wrestling with the adverse influences, fears, threats, obligations, debts, and otherwise. Each of us are wrestling with that, and it can be tenacious. One of the ways of guiding ourselves and encouraging ourselves within the experience of the benevolence, the benevolent will, the peace and the harmony, the compassion, the cooperation, is by recognizing the influences, recognizing the conditions, recognizing how the negative influences are exist and have some type of influence and weight within people's thoughts, within people's decision making, within people's behavior. Um, and one of the significant ways that that negative influence gains weight is through an individual's hmm, lack of knowledge, lack of knowledge of self, through an individual's ignorance, forgetfulness of divine presence, of discipline, of what is healthy for oneself, and what is healthy for others, what is actually needed to live in this life, what is needed to fulfill our purpose in this life, and what's the difference between what our needs are and what our wants are, and how much we are attached to our wants, and how much through that attachment to our wants we are susceptible to those influences, that those negative influences, those entrapments of debt, temptation, threats, fear. Even when we gain those things of wants for a long time, the relationships that we build from sharing those wants, people who are doing the same thing, now we have connections with people, so that it's not just a matter of having the want, but now our social experiences, in addition, are predicated upon that shared experience of having those wants. So now, if we lose those wants, now we're also losing these relationships as well. Presumably, if that's just all what the relationships are about, further fear of losing that. And that's how enveloped and intricate the game gets in many ways. So, and that's how much people are leveraged into just doing whatever is told for the sake of keeping those wants and everything else that's connected with those wants. Um, Signing contracts and otherwise. But that fear, the ignorance of forgetting what our needs are and what our wants are, is that realm where we find ourselves, find our grounding, find our traction, remember ourselves, remember who we are, what life is, what our purpose is, and what we need to do to fulfill our purpose. And when we find what we need, what our purpose is, when we find who we are, what our purpose is, and what we need to fulfill our purpose, what we also recognize, what we find is that we are supported beyond all the influences, beyond all the powers that be, and additionally, When we find our purpose and we recognize what we need to fulfill our purpose, we recognize the earth is supporting us, the divine will is supporting us, the universe is supporting us, karma is supporting us. It's not a matter of conquering, it's not a matter of taking over everything. It's a matter of simply fulfilling our purpose. It's not our individual will, it's not our ego, it's not our right. It's not our individual will, it's our purpose. And it's a power beyond our individual selves. So when we recognize that, when we honor that, we are supported. And that helps us to remember. And that helps us to relationship. Let me tell it. There are a number of different ways of forgetting. There are a number of different ways people are induced into forgetting, lured into forgetting. Ambitions is a big one. The wants again. Confusing again, having these big ideas about doing things in life, wanting to feel important, wanting to be recognized, wanting validation. And pursuing that at the cost of the things that are needed, family, relationship, and otherwise. And then becoming enveloped and obligated as part of the cost of pursuing those ambitions. That's a path of forgetfulness, of forgetting self, because we already are awesome. We already are power and validation exactly at this moment. It matters little what people see, what people recognize, what people say. It's truth. We can, but all right. I'm getting into a point here, and I'm trying to find the bridge of conceptual logic that connects us. But at the risk of just kind of doing a little bit of a leap here, I'm just gonna share a general description about law school, and relating all this back into the macro experience of society, the balances, and the purpose for this particular discussion thread is to help people recognize the balance within our relationships of the micro, macro, powers that be, hierarchies, and all the different levels. So when we are in law school, it can be very daunting, daunting, whatever, one of the don'ts. Because when we are in the position of making the laws, then we see the breadth, the depth, of lawlessness. When we are making the laws, we see the lawlessness. when other people might just see power structures and, for better or worse, blame or honor the people in those positions of authority, we are seeing lawlessness. We know that person just pulled that out of whatever. We know where that person got it from. We know, like, the laws that are being made, that are governed, and that police are enforcing, and people are thrown in jail, people are executed for breaking. And additionally, um, those come from lawmakers, earthly laws. Now, they're universal laws, they're heavenly laws, but I'm talking about the earthly realm of secular governance. We see the lawlessness. This is a little bit involved. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm gonna try to, like, lightweight muscle through this to get to the point here. To be honest, laws are based on principles, truth, and so there has to be some semblance of recognizability amongst the masses about where the laws come from. But particularly within a society as it exists today, the United States, and for the past few generations, and things get so extremely complex. And additionally, what we recognize as lawmakers is the comparative arbitrariness, and how the bias and subjectivity of people just deciding things based upon personal advantage, being bribed, being influenced, or otherwise. That's the nature of how the laws are made. And when one sees that, there's the appearance of lawlessness. That's one thing. Now, when one is trained within that, and people are vying for that, people who talk about loving law and this and the other actually have a strong element of anarchy, and not necessarily in terms of disorder, but in terms of going beyond the law, because one has to be beyond the law in order to make the law. And so, in that nature, in that realm of being beyond the law, it's this darkness, it's the ambiguity, in one has to vie for traction and legitimacy and otherwise, and competition and otherwise. So it's a murky endeavor of being beyond the law. But that is part of the process of studying law and practicing law. So there's an element. Law school is very much a, 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 a school of anarchists in many ways, because these are people who are going beyond the law, who are learning to live beyond the law, competing with each other the whole time and trying to get as much for the different respective constituencies who put them into that position of getting the credentials. And then when people get the credentials of practicing law, being a lawyer, and then going into being a politician or whatever, but particularly being a lawyer, having a command of the law, and then being able to impose that upon others who know much less about the details and the finities of the law. And oftentimes, to be honest, have a less knowledge about principles, and actually are just deep in their own grind and just trying to get what they can, trying to hide as much of the dirt that they're doing, and just trying to make the most of it from day to day and further. And so the lawyer comes around and says, "Oh, you got this thing going on here. Well, you're going to need a lawyer to help you out in navigating with the laws, because we don't want people to, well, how do I put this? Like, make sure they're paying the appropriate taxes, and make sure you got the appropriate license, and make sure you got the appropriate titles for land, and the contracts are all in order, and keeping the proper records, and everybody is has their identification. I mean, all the different rules and everything else for businesses, and additionally, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of laws. And so that's one of the reasons why people hire lawyers, particularly big, complicated corporations hire lawyers to do those things, to handle all those different laws. Uh, because the people, the businesses, abstain from having the knowledge, um, particularly when the laws are extremely complex. Um, People focus specifically on the grind, um, and lose some sight of the principles of honesty, fairness, um, reconciliation, and otherwise, and basically just hire lawyers to get optimally favorable outcomes for what any disagreements, any non-compliance with regulations, or whatever else. But the point is that people lose in that process of doing the grind. People lose sight of the principles, and in losing sight of the principles, rely upon lawyers to abide by the man earthly laws that have some semblance of those principles. So that's in one respect. And I'm speaking a little bit to it, essentially towards that experience of forgetfulness. And in that forgetfulness, there being the fears and everything else like that. Because even when people don't have businesses or whatever, just being threatened with a lawsuit, being threatened with a tax audit or otherwise, um, those are some of the fears that are wielded from the law practitioners. Now, in a further way, in another example, and this is outside of my immediate experience, but I reckon I have a dishonorable medical degree, and I am a doctor, legitimately. But we can recognize the same kind of phenomena that existing within the experience of the practice of medicine, medical school, and doctors, whereby um, when medical students are in medical school and learning about anatomy, body systems, and additionally, just like within law, there is that experience of lawlessness, of anarchy, of being beyond the law in order to determine the law. Amongst the medical students, we can recognize at least some semblance of the experience of extreme, perhaps one way of describing it is hedonism, of living outside of the bodily experience. When being so detached from genitalia, of doing surgery, and additionally seeing cadavers and just being numb to death and torture and affliction. It's just a body, it's just a physiology, it's chemistry and physics, and additionally, um, like touching somebody's vagina, touching somebody's penis, touching somebody's anus is like hitting the wall, or tapping on the table. It's that desensitization, even the dehumanization of self, of existing in a way that is beyond like the physical. Um, and then with that knowledge, going back to say, oh yeah, well, you got this rash because of this, and there's that digestive problem because you ate that. And so that's one way of looking at the experience of medicine and doctors. Um, and again, people are in their grinds, working, and lose sight of what is healthy, what is physically needed and healthy to live, what is optimal, getting exercise, eating properly, and additionally. And thus, when experiencing, just with the people experiencing troubles with the government, troubles with the law, and abiding by that, when people experience challenges with their body, having some issues of digestion, irritation, joint, whatever, extremities, and additionally, significantly resulting from the malpractice practice of one's own behavior in terms of nutrition and exercise or lack thereof. And so relying upon the doctors to provide a remedy. Um, Back in the day, doctors often would just say, "Yo, get off your butt and do some exercise. Stop eating so much junk, candy and fat and sugar and salt, and eat some plants." These days, it's popping pills and the apothecary, the chemist, chemical prescriptions. So, the point is that rather than having a heightened knowledge, um, it's simply a matter of complying with the directive of the professional, with the direction of the professional. So, like with the lawyers, instead of the lawyer saying, "You know what, you should probably treat your employees fair. You should probably like pay the appropriate taxes. You should probably just be fair in that contract and not try to get over. You should probably not exploit those suppliers over there." Instead of saying that, the lawyers just say what the people can get away with as long as the people pay the retainer. And then with this in the series of so the people still aren't learning appropriate behavior, the healthy behavior, the principles. They're just learning how to continue running that game. Same thing with the doctors. The doctors at this point, by and large, abstain from saying, "Yo, walk every day. Um, do this healthy. Drink water." I mean, to be honest, doctors do say this. People don't listen, and doctors don't require it. And very often, it's the prescription. So the basic point is that rather than relearning, remembering what healthy is, and devoting oneself to doing what is healthy, it's simply a matter of abiding by the direction of the doctor, um, to experience some relief of the adverse symptoms of the adverse behavior. And so the long-term consequences of that, the ongoing consequences and the intergenerational consequences of that, when parents teach that to their children, and not even talking about grown men as pediatricians putting their hands on and examining children. That's serious. All right, that's another topic. But when parents pass on these tendencies onto the children, what happens again is an increasing dependence, an increasing ignorance of oneself and what's healing, um, and with that ignorance, a dependence on somebody else, the policies, and again, whereas with the lawyer calls upon the client to provide a retainer, a monthly provision, a yearly provision, just to have retain the access to the lawyer services. With the doctors, it's the medical insurance, and as long as the premiums are paid, there it is. So the consequence of that is people's dependency, ignorance of what's healthy for oneself, principles and behavior, healthy healthy lifestyle in terms of nutrition and exercise and rest. Um, Forgetfulness of that, ignorance of that, and dependence on the direction of the professional. And so that's where we get the experience of the increased servitude of people, and the increased susceptibility towards the adverse influences, because doctors are employed by hospitals, by HMOs, if those still exist these days, and otherwise. So, and those entities have other motivations that are basically just money driven, and so that we get further into the realm of the plutocratic cults, because the plutocratic cults don't necessarily have a very high knowledge about medicine, but have the leverage over the doctors, very expensive schooling, debts, um, even the doctors forgetting the difference between needs and wants, doctors looking for acceptance within the hierarchies of society, being recognized as being intelligent, being recognized as affluent, having access to neighborhoods and the clubs and everything else like that. And those are all the realms of the plutocratic cults, because the plutocratic cults have lands and facilities and the access to the elite institutions and associations. So doctors become in the pocket of those plutocratic cults accordingly, by and large. I mean, there's obviously a spectrum of variance. Similarly with the lawyers. Lawyers are somewhat further, perhaps, I won't say blue collar, but yeah. So, all right, I'll leave it at that. And we can look at other professions, engineers, otherwise, but those are the lawyers and doctors are those that are looked at as in terms of like the hierarchy of the labor within society, and it's not even the hierarchy within society because the hierarchy of society does not labor, even mentally, generally speaking. Even the entrepreneurs, those aren't the hierarchies, so to speak, that people know about publicly, generally speaking. So, all right. Um, so that's again talking to the process of some of the forgetfulness, and then in that forgetfulness, the servitude. In that servitude, um, being actors of the policies of the plutocracies, particularly the plutocratic cults, either um, willingly or very begrudgingly. Uh, People can make decisions. People can let go. Um, uh, People can adjust. People can negotiate. People can prioritize. But that's the basic, the general consideration, the general joint of that. Now, for the point for all of this is to get to where I was about to say in terms of like the affirmational, the encouraging consideration. Amidst all of this, amidst all the leverages, amidst all the ignorances, the forgetfulness, amidst all the temptation and everything else like that. When we look at the relationship between the quote unquote powers that be and the regular, ordinary Joe, the ordinary, regular person, it's beneficial to recognize this. And this is something, at least comparatively new, of me saying, because I tend to be the categorical um, equivalator, saying that everything's on the same level. But in actuality, just to be honest, like facts, is this: when we look at all the powers that be, let's we can start at the most like immediate level, kind of sort of um, within society. In in the power binaries, the police need people further than the people need police. The city needs people greater than the people need the city. The nation needs people greater than the people need the nation. Civilization needs people much greater than the people need civilization. The corporations need people much greater than the people need corporations. The banks need people much greater than people need the banks. The plutocratic cults need people much greater than people need the plutocratic cults. Facts. Doesn't say that one annihilates the other or otherwise, but it helps conceptually to balance the playing field. And that's actuality. People can live without a police force. People can live and do live without a city. Nations come and go. People continue living. The existence of the nation itself, essentially, by definition, needs people. Even the underclass. Civilization needs people. Civilizations rise and fall. people endure amidst that. That's discussable, um, but it's facts. And again, it's helpful to keep in mind when perceiving so called insurmountability of powers that be, and recognizing the powers that be are powers that need. The powers need. And that goes into something else that people talk about recently amidst the whole notions of Armageddon and apocalypse and everything else like that. People talk about the $1 billion, 250, I think that's the figure that's being utilized, $250 billion bunkers and whatever. First of all, that doesn't sound right. Second of all, and if anything, if there's any actuality, remote semblance of actuality to that, the question is like where, and I guess why, but particularly where. Like, is it on native land? Is it in Antarctica? If it's in Antarctica, yo, okay. And also, yo, what is the purpose of it? Like, is it supposed to be some kind of like battle fortress of sending out missile silos, or is it a matter of refuge away from people doing dirt to each other? So again, that I don't listen to a lot of that. I hear it, and when I hear it fairly often, when I hear it from people who are closer to me, then there's increasing onus of me responding to that. But that's the response. So, and again, like everybody's in relationship. Nobody is like Michael Corleone says. Everybody's in the susceptibility of being touched, and that's not the intention of doing that. But it's just recognizing that everybody relies upon everybody else in one way or another. So even in that scenario of $250 billion bunkers, um, first of all, the whole notion of again the nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles as like the fear tactic, it's very obsolete. I mean, it's antiquated, and maybe it's just again, as I just said, designed designated for a specific demographic of age and class and perhaps ethnicity. But like when you look at the evolving methodologies of warfare between collectives, it's biological, it's DNA based, it's sabotage in terms of um, telecommunications and programming, and additionally, that's where warfare is being done at this very moment. Um, and so, like nuclear weapons, that's so 8 track. So, when you talk about bunkers, okay, and uh, if it's supposed to like protect against a nuclear attack, and I'm not pish poshing that. I'm not wishing any of that, but it's a matter of putting it into perspective because even that multi-billion, trillion-dollar bunker or whatever else, first of all, presumably is going to have some type of systems. It's going to have some type of propensity of communication outside of the bunker itself with the actual world. It may have a self-sustaining like ecosystem within itself. It's going to have some type of ventilation or some type of machinery, and whatever machinery that it has, that machinery is going to need parts, and so there's going to have to be the methodology of constructing those parts, even if it's through multi-dimensional printing or otherwise. But there's always some necessity of materiality coming from outside of a specific finite thing, just because that's the nature of technology at this point. So all that being said, in that necessity, there's vulnerability. Again, if it's an all-inclusive, like not communicate with anybody else outside of that bunker at all, forever, ever, then okay. But if there is that intentionality of communicating, then there's that susceptibility for that communication of being sabotaged, and not even only sabotaged, but access to the systems within the bunker. And once somebody has access to the systems in the bunker, all of that exclusivity of the bunker becomes increasingly a susceptibility, a vulnerability. Um, so again, what it's the whole yin and yang. So ain't nothing new under the sun, and it can be further complicated and everything. I don't have to decode and break down all the specific technology and everything else to describe the vulnerability of it. It's just a matter of awareness of that, and again, it's not a priority. That's not the priority at this moment in this experience. So Anyways, there's some other element, and again, the other thing again, ventilation and access to other types of material sustenance, um, and vulnerability to again the DNA kind of things of people still constructing a biological type of phenomena that causes disease. And again, once an entrapped, quote unquote, an insulated population is increasingly susceptible to those types of aggressions. So, uh, anyways, that's some of it. One other thing also is that, okay, who's going to live there? Is it just like one billionaire by himself in that entire complex? Does he have a crew? Is that crew like going to like forsake all their relatives and everything else and just live the rest of their lives? And if that's the case, then are they planning to have another generation? And if that's the case, who are they going to marry? And additionally, is that all predetermined? Have they like pre-calculated all the marriages for like the next 2, 3, 4, 5 generations? Um, Maybe there's further things are they're much further. There are collectives and there are experiences in society that do that. But it's a rather involved thing, particularly for new money, because bunkers seem to be a new money type of thing, and oftentimes new money doesn't have that type of history of making those type of decisions. Maybe getting some consultation and advice from people who do have that type of knowledge, but like it can be enough to like sway and impress people who are outside of that scene and are just impressed by big numbers or whatever else. But when you think about like the details and the plausibility, it's like, eh. And again, right now we working about our own the village right here, and optimizing our experience of peace and well being, people being fed, clothed, warm. People are talking about the cold just today when I'm at the bus stop. So like these are some of the priorities, and we have a decision about where we invest our attention and where we invest our words and thoughts and actions. So Confucius talks about um, those who do not occupy an office that is charged with the responsibility of making a decision concerning a specific policy don't discuss that policy. Like if that it's because it's like gossip. It's like frivolous talk. Now, here, this is the purpose of education and helping to put things in perspective. And this is just a generalization of awareness about society so that we can help like balance people's concerns and fears and ignorances and be further encouraged to look at immediate priorities and concentrate further on that. So this isn't a matter of like not intended as gossip and um, not intended to influence people in that particular instance. Is intended to influence people and encourage people to learn increasingly about one's own self, where one comes from, the land one comes from, the rivers one comes from, one's ancestors come from, the languages one comes from. All that is provides further grounding and rootedness and resilience amidst all these conditions. Because when we learn the stories of where we come from our ancestors, our prophets, and our sages, we see the people, we see how our forebears go through these conditions before, and we see how our forebears proceed through these conditions in a favorable way. Not unscathed, not without stories to tell, um, but enduringly. So that tempers the fears, and it provides ground for what they say, the ground beneath our feet and the wind behind our back, partner. So, uh, respect to Tupac and Juice. So, I think that's the Hudlin brothers. Anyways, all right. So again, putting the whole notion of the bunkers and everything else, the whole Armageddon type stuff, in context, and it's not wishing it. It's not egging people on. It's not um, tempting people or just or trying to like bait people into doing those things, but it's simply just concentrating on what our priorities are. And to be honest, also to have increasing resilience amidst people utilizing those fears, like the people that we know utilizing those fears for manipulation, for signing on to some bandwagon type stuff. Because but oftentimes what that is that people do these fears and hype people up and get people all riled up, and then say, "Oh, you need to sign up and be a member of our thing and provide a contribution or do this and the other." And so they're banking off of those fears that others are talking about, that are messaging through conventional media, and additionally, and utilizing that for personal gain. Uh, and it may be intentional or unintentional, but it's not the most productive of thing because it's based upon the base experience. So the genuine experience, the rooted and fertile endeavor is one that encourages, that the one that is positive, not naive, not dreamy and like some prosperity gospel type stuff, but that is genuine, that is rooted, that is humble, that is modest, um, that is patient step by step, that is practiced by the people who are espousing whatever is being espoused, um, and talking about action steps and behavior rather than just hype beyond people's control, and conjuring emotive responses and getting all heated or getting all hyped about something as a way of motivation into signing on to membership or otherwise. So um, productive, honest, positive, affirmational. I don't want to say proven, but anyway, all right. So there's that, and peace and blessings to all kinfolk. Everybody's doing their best. Sometimes we get enveloped in the tactics of convention just because we perceive some efficacy within that, and again it's that forgetfulness again. So um, we're all here to remind each other in a respectful, friendly way. Take it for what it's worth. Um, we can discuss it. We can reason about it, um, and respect each other in that process. We're all sovereigns. We're all sovereigns. So we have to. It's beneficial for us to recognize and respect each other. We all have something to learn from each other, and we all have something to teach each other. So, anyways, all right. We got a joint schedule, God willing, tomorrow. It's going to be today at some point soon. Meaning that it's not near midnight now, but yeah, we're approaching that point, and I'm supposed to be making preparations because it begins early in the AM, early in the morning. Haha. That's a mix between Heather B and Robert Palmer. All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to share at this moment. Um, I'm gonna try to focus on positive again. We done flexed a tree, a plant, in the past joint. I don't need to be doing it again. It's still dark. It's not gonna be much of anything new since yesterday. The plant is still here. Hallelujah, alhamdulillah, Baruch Hashem. Give thanks and praise to the Most High. Jayom, Shishir, Medo. We got a visit from the flying squirrels yesterday. They can be so quiet on arrival. We had an experience earlier today with the birdies. That's another story though. And it's actually still unfolding. Interesting it is. Anything else? What else to share? What else to share at this moment? We're talking about powers. Song stories, rituals, ethics, rivers, languages, calendars, knowledge of self, discipline of self, love of self. That's the foundation. Knowledge of self, discipline of self, love of self. Rivers, languages, calendars, song, stories, rituals, ethics. Spirit, heart, mind, body. Ulun. Husband and wife, parent and child, elder sibling, younger sibling, teacher and student, friend and friend. Relationship. All our relatives. I can go into another topic that I consider at this very moment, but that's going to be a little bit of another tangent, and it's not the most necessarily immediately positive in terms of a send up. Talk about relationship. It's best to do it by example. So I'm gonna pause on that for the moment. Indeed. Solutions we're working on. I'm supposed to be putting something together at this very moment. So it may just be an hour and a half today. I talked about theater yesterday. There's further considerations with that, but I'm going to leave it as it is at the moment. I can talk about youth running game, and taking on an increasing bulk of the grift of convention in the unfolding process of civilizational evolution at this moment. But even youth has its limits in terms of the grift. Truth trumps energy. Truth guides energy. So there's often an experience of invincibility amongst youth, and being able, like, in those ambitions, and even perhaps being sponsored or picked by authorities or hierarchies within convention, and thus saying, oh yeah, we got backup, da 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 da, and then having certain ambition of taking on other established entities, adults, organizations, and otherwise. There can be a considerable amount of success, particularly when given guidance from the plutocracies on how to compete and endeavor conflict, antagonism, imperialism, or conquest amidst other entities. Again, having some guidance to do on what to do and what not to do. Because those who have that knowledge don't have the ability to do it themselves, and so need somebody else to actually be the energy. Those that have, or the entity, those that have the energy, and particularly the physical strength, and perhaps less sensibility. Point though is this: it can be very effective when youth are equipped with knowledge from the plutocracy. Can given people's it can be an exhilarating thing to take on, like, grown ass people, grown ass men, and like succeed, like take them out, knowing the vulnerabilities, knowing the inside secrets, and everything else like that. through the auspices of the plutocratic guidance, um, and so get experience within that. However, truth, honesty, um, the youthful exuberance, the youthful uh, experience of invincibility has limitations, and many of the adults, and I'm talking about my personal experience, but I abstain from proclaiming to have invincibility. I'm as invincible as anybody else is. I'm no better, no worse. I walk with God. I'm a piece of shit. So, um, this is an awareness of some of the game. Um, Many adults, many grown men who are. That's what I'll share. Okay, that's what I'll share here. I'll share this story afterwards. All right. Many grown men who are perhaps outside of the system or somewhat antagonistic of the system, and additionally can get some standing, can get some constituency, can get a following, and have certain amount of stability until encountering a youth like Benny Blanco from the Bronx. Um, and the primary way that youth have that ability of getting through all the armament of an adult in that circumstance is because there's still a significant amount of untruth within that adult, within that grown man, grown woman, or otherwise. And whilst that grown man may levy that grown man's position against conventional authority in strong ways and be recognized and supported by a larger constituency and outside constituencies because of that challenge towards conventional hierarchy, still having one's own deficiencies in terms of hypocrisy. For example, a brother might call out injustice, racism, sexism, classism, or whatever on a conventional authority, and like have significant knowledge and have histories of like what all the atrocities are and everything else like that, so that conventional authority, conventional hierarchies is very neutralized, is very like paralyzed, and be able to do anything to thwart that person, and even like get at that person. But then again, hiring youth, particularly from proximity of that um, uh, leader, and giving the youth in that proximity with information about that leader. So that whilst that leader might be like some very accomplished person in many respects, at the same time might have this thing that very few people know about. Maybe having some indiscriminate or indiscreet relations with young women. Um, uh, there's always the whole thing about tax this and tax avoidance, tax fraud, and embezzlement or whatever else. I mean, but it, to be effective, it's beneficial to be honest, and to be honest, a lot of dudes are doing something that's considerably unethical, and the constituency around that person might know about it, might condone it because they recognize that even though like who's perfect and what the benefit that he's providing for the constituency way outweighs the detriments that are caused from his indiscretion, so they tolerate it. But when the youth in proximity are provided with the information, don't necessarily reveal it up front, and instead, through the guidance of the plutocratic cult leadership, utilize a gradual methodology of um, gaining some ground on that leader to be able to mount a further aggression and conquest for such a leader. So the point is that the actual susceptibility, the actual vulnerability of that leader is that leader's own dishonesty and untruth in one way or the other. And when a leader is proficiently honest, not necessarily perfectly honest, but proficiently honest, and youth endeavor that type of conquest, that type of aggression, um, what ends up happening is the same thing that the conventional hierarchy is fearful of and avoiding, which is the truth being made known amongst the youth, because even the youth ain't perfect. And the youth got their own indiscretions and lacks of discipline, and additionally, and so, and often are further vulnerable to those being revealed or manipulated or otherwise. So, point is that there's limitations to all this. So, what's my point for saying any of this, all of this? I'm trying to think. We're talking about powers that be, and one of the tactics that the powers that be utilize through the youth, because the youth have less dirt, generally speaking, um, that give the youth additional amount of strength, stability, strength and credibility, and um, making aggressions towards entities that are perceived as antagonistic towards conventional hierarchy. One side note, as a disclaimer, I articulate again that we are not rebels. Like we're not promoting revolution. We are not promoting overthrow. We are not promoting the taking down of governments, or even the taking down of plutocratic cults, or any of that. We're communicating an understanding of conditions at this moment. We are promoting the well-being, the optimal well-being of life on this earth, of all beings on this earth, of all human beings on this earth. We are the law. We are not the only entities of the law, but we are the law. We have that responsibility, we have that weight, we have that authority, we have that knowledge, and we have that discipline. We're not perfect, we're not invincible, but that's who and what we are. And so it's a different nature than being rebels. It's a different nature than being revolutionaries. It is accepting responsibility, and doing our best to promote the well-being of all life. So that is that element. There's something else in that respect before I go to the story that I was about to mention. I was talking about we are the law. I myself, I work for the world law since even before law school. And one thing I was going to say in terms of like the hierarchy, the conventional hierarchy, like hiring youth or contracting youth. I remember being in undergrad, 18, 19 years old, seeing recruitment flyers for the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and it being just like working for Procter and Gamble or KPMG. It's, oh, would you like to live the life of excitement? I remember seeing the flyer with youth wearing sunglasses, and just like this intrigue of espionage, and additionally, 18, 19 years old. So that's an awareness, and a lot can be learned in 4 or 5 years for a 23-year-old, a 24-year-old, such that there's still that credibility of youth, but at the same time, a significant amount of very sophisticated training in terms of manipulation and otherwise. So this is part of the nature of how the game works, particularly when adults are increasingly and hyper, let's see, I don't want to say corrupted, but enveloped, entrenched within corruption to the point of losing so much credibility, that there's further necessity, further need for intermediaries to enact things. So again, we go back into what the needs are. The powers that be are the powers that need. So, and again, I will say again, even within that scenario, the powers that be doing the best that the kinfolk know how to do. The nature of progressing in that respect means, again, a lot of losing a sense of self, and essentially fulfilling a position that is highly leveraged against an individual. So, and that's not meant as a condescending kind of, oh, it's not their fault, but it's a matter of having an awareness and a compassion for the condition, and not vilifying, not condemning, Not saying, oh, everybody, all them kids, kin folks, condemned to hell or whatever else. It's not a matter of that. It's just a matter of understanding the conditions and the tactics, the cause and effect, and how to do better, how to prepare for those actions, but then also how to provide healing for all people involved. So that is some of the purpose of sharing that element of that. But as I said, I for over 20 years I work for world law. I work for the World Authority. Um, the United Nations is part of this, but the World Authority exists beyond the specific constructs of the uh, notarized or the institutions of notoriety. Uh, but the fact is that much like somebody works for the government and gets a pension and services, and additionally, those of us who work for world law receive the same thing. The nature of the world law is different. It's very subtle. It's very modest. It's very um, in, in terms of like the aesthetics, in terms of like the luxuries and comforts and everything else like that. It's comparatively rudimentary. Again, it's a matter of focusing on the needs rather than wants. Um, Religiosity is very much a part of it, and it's not a specific religiosity, but it goes hand in hand. There's a confluence between religiosity and world law. Um, and when you look at religiosity and those who are in the higher levels of influence within religiosities, those individuals are living by and large very frugal, modest aesthetics in terms of lifestyle. So, anyways, that's just part of it. So, in working for world law, um, there is compensation, there is pension, there is support. Um, it's different than just like quote unquote calling in the cavalry and then or hitting a panic button and here come the troops as backup. And additionally, it's increasingly in the kind of like an undercover thing because the nature of this type of work, the nature of this type of law and this type of lifestyle is is a world servant. It's humble, it's tenacious, and the accountability is beyond this world. It's beyond this earth, and so like there, it's when Jesus talks about when he's about to get accosted and says like, "Why are you bringing out your sword? Don't you know like I could call on onto God and bring legions of angels if that was the necessity?" But there's a purpose for everything happening. So I'm not soliciting immediate crucifixion or any eventual crucifixion, but it's just a matter of articulating the nature of it. There are additional examples of that. So, point is that in living this discipline and occupation of world law, specifically, I'm a spiritual teacher, and I've been a spiritual diplomat for over 20 years, and there is earthly evidence that backs and supports that. Um, just like working for a national government, a city government, a state government, there's essential salary, there is a retirement plan, there's pension, but it just doesn't exist. It exists in a way that's different than uh, what is evidenced in the those earthly contexts of state government and city government and national government. Uh, Point for sharing that is perspective. Perhaps it's a matter of just as they're intermediaries amidst the plutocratic cults, um, there are also intermediaries in terms of manifesting compassion, altruism, balance, honesty, ethics. And so I'm testifying um, from this experience of being one of those intermediaries, as being a spiritual teacher, a spiritual diplomat, and an authority within the experience of world law. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. So, Now I get to the story time, and I think we're gonna wrap it up at this point, and maybe keep this under 2 hours. Um, a few weeks ago, probably maybe over a month ago or so, I am on the bus. The bus goes through an area known in this area of Cuyahoga as Little Italy, Italia Poco. And as I'm as I'm going on the bus, traveling on the bus, going through the neighborhood, I observe a group of men. These are, could say, middle-aged men, that probably a little bit older than middle-aged, maybe about 60s, heavy set, kind of squat, 60-year-old type of men. I think there might be like three. And so, what the idea that immediately comes to mind is a corporation. Three people, that's what constitutes a corporation. That's what's necessary for establishing a corporation according to the United States process. But beyond just notion of corporation, what I observe is like the old Roman and even Greco-Roman methodology of political organization, political collusion, strategizing, uh, can say conspiracy, but just like there's like power core. Those are the decision makers. There it is, right there. Those three brethren, those older brethren on the street, right there. That's it. That's who's calling the shots. And again, this is the thought, and it's like looking at a civilizational paradigm whilst I am observing what's on the street. So in a civilizational paradigm, when we look at the model of the republic, um, it's recognizing that in a republic there isn't a king that is in charge. The nature of it is very different than what is experienced through much of human civilization to date. It's not new, but it's different than what a lot of our ancestors, prophets, and sages immediately, directly, um, temporally contend with in terms of challenges of from authoritarians. The republic is a very different phenomena. So it's not one particular king; it's a collective of people who shirk responsibility, who put puppets in place to take the falls and everything. And it's a method of manipulation, of temptation, and continual grifting. And again, there's like the core, and that core can adjust. One might get removed, and another person might arrive, and one core can compete with another core, and additionally, and there can be collusions amongst cores against other cores and everything. But just three being a core. Um, so that's what I observe on the street as I'm continuing on the bus at that moment. I'm observing. Okay, there's the core of the republic right there. That's who's calling the shots. That's where the decisions are being made. That's where it's emanating from. That's where all the strings end. That's where all the puppetry is like based. Right there, those three brethren, right there. Clear, clear, clear. Just very clear. That's where it is. That's who's responsible for the machinery of the governance of the imperialism. Right there, those three in the middle of Roma. So then I think, well, that can't be it. That's not all of it. Because that doesn't last long. Like 60-year-olds, like what they got, 20 years left, maybe. Nah, peace and blessings with the brethren. But just like in terms of like just looking about control and addition, like that only lasts so long. Like how does that thing last? Okay, well, obviously they need help from other people. And so as I'm thinking about that, then there it is. I see where it is right there. I see where they get their help. I see where they get the 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 collusion, the traction, where their policies and how their policies are manifested. Because at that moment, just a few seconds later, as I'm continuing on the bus, now the three brethren are passed behind us. Now we're continuing on the sidewalk, and so what I see then at that moment is a young couple, a young sister and a young brother together. Look like husband, wife, boyfriend, and girlfriend, but a couple. And so I say, yep, that's how the policies are manifested, because it's through the family, the advent of the family. So the family is not in control. The family is adherent to that power structure, that power core of the three brethren that I just saw. And the one brethren, the one husband, let's say just say husband, they were young, they may be in like early 20s. The young husband is comparatively ignorant, like doesn't know everything that's going on. The woman does. The woman knows a lot about what's going on, doesn't say everything. Her role is to keep her husband in line, to be cooperative with the powers that be, to make him as happy as possible, to keep him in line, call him out, keep him guessing, keeping him on his toes, having children, raising the children to be cooperative and in line, and additionally, but not for her husband to get too ambitious to try to take on the power structure, and also at the same time not to become too intimidated or emasculated and feeling himself inferior, for him to be placated within the theater of the politics. Because if he's knowledgeable of those three calling all the shots, like his masculinity is going to be, yo, nah, not that, nah. So she has to keep him appeased from that, and just kind of enveloped in the less insignificant things of life, the aesthetics. Oh, it's so cold. We need this and we need that. You need to work. Haha, you need to work. You need to earn wages. And that's where your value is. Da 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 da. You need to provide for your family. Aren't you a man? You got children. Da 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 da. So that's where the traction of the core puppetry manifests the policies of the puppetry of the core. It's through that advent of the family relationship. And again, that's just one family. It's multitudes of families, but that was just one couple at that moment. So now I'm seeing the three brethren who are the puppeteers of the Republic. Then I'm seeing the example of the practitioners. The enforcer, if the man has to go to war, then he gets conscripted into the military. If he has to labor, he labors. If he has to govern and use his mind, then that's what he does. Again, in relationship with his wife. And that's what they teach the children to prepare optimally, proceedingly. So, and keeping as much attention as possible away from, that's a little bit awkward phrasing, drawing as little attention as possible to the actions of the core, and all the indiscretions, the corruptions, the atrocities, and everything else that the core is directly involved in, and as well as orchestrating. So that's the two big elements of the Republic right there: the core and then the practitioners. The bus keeps going, and I say that can't be it still. And so then I see another element of the Republic, about the machinery of how it works. And what I see is a young, attractive sister. Again, early 20s, similar to the wife, but she's solo. She's dolo. She's by herself. She's running. Oh, she's a lone wolf. She's a lone wolf. She's unattached to a man, but she seems very fertile. She gets the attention of men. So that's her role. She brings men in. There's the potential of being a mate, of being married, and playing that role that I just see a few seconds ago. But at the same time, she's also can be a hired gun, a hired temptress. She can be promoted through the hierarchy, directly, indirectly from the core, the power core, and get access to luxury and everything else like that, even for a brief period of time, maybe to 29, maybe to the age of 30. But that's the life she's in at the moment, the lone wolf, and part of her role is to attract the men, and get men signed on to her program, and be her suitor, and make promises, make pledges, provide gifts, be viable recruitment material for the core and for the practitioners and the policymakers, and additionally, but that's the lone wolf. She has the potential of being a mate, presumably, but in the meanwhile, she's compensated, and she's drawing in other wolves and entities around her. for the purposes of service to the core, the power core. So then I say, okay, you know what? This looks like it all, because that's where she gathers the lone wolf. Oh, there's a hidden element, the fourth element, which is maybe the male lone wolf, or the tiger, and that is the counterpart of the female lone wolf. So the female lone wolf is seen in public, elusive. She's fast moving. There's an elitist air about her, a sense of inaccessibility, which makes her further alluring, and that's what brings men into her net. But her counterpart is the male lone wolf, who you do not see. He's the one who knows about the power core. He knows about the trappings of the husband-wife family construct in the republic. He knows about the essential enslavement, the servitude of the man, the husband, towards the republic, and he cannot be satisfied. He cannot be appeased. As much as he may try, he can't do that. So he stays out in the distance. He's out in hiding, like he's out of sight, and he's doing his own things. He's doing his own grind or whatever else to feed himself, and plot and plan and observe and everything else like that. But he's staying outside the thing. So I did not see him on the bus, but I figured, oh, wait a minute. You know what? I know he's around. He actually might be on the bus right there and observing everything that's going on. Hold on. So that's what I observe on the bus. And when I see the lone wolf, the female lone wolf, when I consider the male lone wolf, I think to myself, yeah, okay, these are the elements of Romulus and Remus. I just saw it right here, going through Little Italy. There it is right there. That's society. That's the republic. That's the postmodern civilization of Western society right there. That's how it works. That's the basic, succinct synopsis of the mechanics. It manifests itself in corporations and governments and schools and universities and everything else like that. But those are the core elements right there. All the different ethnicities, religions, and additionally, they may have their integrity to maintain their own kind of ways of doing things, but at the same time have to have some functionality with what that core is at this moment, in this place of Earth. Now, there it is. That whole span of maybe 30 seconds, just the whole Western civilization just done did got deconstructed. There it is. Now, as the bus turns and I reach my stop, I get off the bus. And then as I get off the bus, I have to connect to the next stop for the connecting bus. And as I'm getting off the bus and proceeding to get to the cross light, there's an auntie there. And I think the auntie might have been on the bus. No. The auntie was walking on the sidewalk. And so she sees me waiting, and the bus continues on without me. And I'm waiting there at the side, and so the auntie is waiting with me at the intersection, and so she just she has like an energy, and she has a humble walk about her, and she makes some proclamation about hallelujah. And so I say, okay, I hear what language we're talking now. So we speak that language. We talk about Jesus. We talk about the Gospels. I talk about the Beatitudes. I talk about the Sermon on the Mount, because that's pretty much the first thing I talk about when I meet a Christian from the first time. When we have that type of window to have the discussion, I just bring up the Sermon on the Mount. And now we have a shared frame of reference. We have some substance that we can discuss of mutual agreement, and build from that. So, and when I say that, she kind of looks at me like, wow, beauty, yes, yeah. So then I start, we talk further about specifically about the Beatitudes, which is how the Sermon on the Mount begins. Awesome, powerful, basic, foundational teachings that Jesus provides, that can be perceived as revolutionary, but again, it's authority, as Jesus says himself. Then as I'm talking with the auntie, lo and behold, here comes that lone wolf that I had seen just a few seconds, a few minutes before. She's running, she's jogging. She was jogging beforehand. And so she just happens to turn in the same direction that the bus turns. And there she is. And she stops running. She stops right there, maybe 20 meters away from me, right in front of my, like I'm talking to the auntie and she's like stopped 20 meters behind the auntie, and I say, aha, indeed, the cosmos is at work. And so now the young sister, the lone wolf, is stretching. And I'm like, oh, da, 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 da. So I focus on the conversation with our dear auntie, and again, the auntie is exhilarated, and let me say it. But just we were vibing off that conversation, and so that's plenty for that moment. And she continues on her way, and I'm still waiting at the light. Um, and as I'm waiting in the light, the young sister is still there. And just like she's stretching. Now I've been there. It's a little bit of a wait for that light. So I was there probably for like at least a minute or two. Probably no. I talked with the auntie because I wasn't paying attention when I'm talking with the auntie in terms of I wasn't paying attention to the light. I was just talking with the auntie at that point. Then after talking with these, so we were talking for a few minutes, and the sister was standing, stretching there for a few minutes at that point. And then after the auntie leaves, the sister is still there. And so I had thoughts about approaching, but at the same time, discipline and priorities, and I had something else of significance to tend to from that day. But I am mindful of like that that fourth wall being um, evaporated in terms of sitting back and kind of just pontificating about life through the personification and the projections and projected personifications of civilization, and then here it is right in front of me, um, indirectly, actually directly but subtly, and presumably inviting participation. So we did not keep this under 2 hours. Anyways, eventually the light turns, and I continue across the street and on to the next stop. Um, I guess the humorous thing is, at that point, I have a football with me, and I start kicking the football. Then I have a conversation with brethren about the football, and I actually miss the next bus, the connecting bus. So, um, because I invested in that conversation, so interesting enough. Um, Priorities, yeah. Marriage, yeah. That's what I say. How about that's what I do? How about it's also beyond my doing? Um, and also that leads to the consideration of Adam when we talk about the narrative of creation. Here we wrap it up. Here we wrap it up. We talk about Adam, and Hava, Eve, and we talk about how Adam marries Eve, how the two are brought together. Adam provides the names for all the different life of the earth and has all this tremendous knowledge, but has yet to be able to find somebody to be a partner in life with Adam through such a union to bring new life into this world, into this universe, into this temporal realm. And so it is described within Torah that a deep sleep is brought over Adam. He's goes unconscious, and during that period, a rib is removed from his rib cage. A bone is removed from his rib cage, and that bone is fashioned into a woman. And when he awakens from that state, he finds woman and says, "Whew, here she is. At last, here's flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone." And the two are man and wife, husband and wife. And one of the considerations in that narrative, it's a primordial narrative, and there's so much substance. There's an infinity of substance that's gleaned from that narrative. That's just intrinsically involved within that narrative. Any narrative about creation and the first man and first woman. In this particular narrative, that notion of the rib being taken from his side, that being a description of an opening in his defenses, in his fortress, in his force field, that allows his heart to be reached from outside, that allows his heart to reach from inside. And it's through that opening, involuntary, beyond his volition. He has all this knowledge and command about everything that's going around him, but something from him is taken so that he can actually relate, so that he can actually connect with another life. in an unprecedented way that's beyond his knowledge, that's beyond what he knows up to that point. And that exact portion that's taken from him is the formation of the woman. Um, and so that's one consideration of that, of the opening of the heart of the man's defenses. Because when we know men in this life, we know how hardened men are, how hardened men can be through the betrayals and nastiness of life, of not trusting, not having affection and otherwise. Because people just use it for their own gains. So I ain't doing that bullshit. But it's when amidst those defenses, it can get nice with it and like undefeated with that. But it's through the vulnerability, through a breach in those defenses, that he's actually able to be in relationship in a miraculous way with a woman to bring new life. Let me tell it. Um, so that's one consideration. Another consideration is that the man needs to get over himself in order to be with a woman. Needs to get over his ego, his pride, his insecurity, his vulnerabilities, just over himself. He needs to get over himself in order to be with a woman. Let me tell it. Um, that's another thing. And another thing is um, the consideration that maybe there's multiple women. Maybe there is, like, that's part of his process of naming things, of articulating the nature of things in life. It includes all the different women, and it's eventually one woman that reveals himself to himself in a way that is unprecedented, that facilitates that awakening, that confirms, rewards, balances that vulnerability, that openness to his heart, from his heart. So that's another consideration. Uh, to be honest, I'm gonna say this at the risk of just somewhat being down, but recently there's an awareness of basically three phenomena in life for that hardened man, and those three phenomena are pain, energy, and truth. And all of the experiences, all the relationships, and everything else about life is just a combination of those three things: pain, energy, and truth. Some things are high energy, some things, I ain't got energy to be doing that at this moment. I'm afraid of it. I just ain't got the energy to be dealing with that. Or is this too much pain? Nah, I'm not doing that. And it's not a matter of being averse towards pain, but just I'm not causing that type of pain. I'm not availing myself to that type of pain. Or I'm going to have to endure this type of pain. But everything's going to be pain, one way or the other. Um, the energy helps in balancing of that. So the further balancing phenomena in that trifecta is the truth. Um, God, woman, relationship, life, purpose, altruism, healing, truth. It's truth. It's all truth. So when we look about um, our priorities in life, our actions, our relationships with others, our routines on a daily basis, what our plans are, and additionally, we can look at those three factors: how much truth is in it, um, how much pain is involved, how much pain is caused, and how much energy we got. Uh, and when we look at, again, going back to that notion of the powers that be, the fear, the intimidation, the influences, the leverage, the pains that we experience in that, the highs and lows of energy. Um, when there's the perception of being overcome, being overwhelmed by negative influences. And additionally, we can find some solace, some comfort, balance in the fact that truth balances all those negative influences. And additionally, so anyways, that's a little bit it's a little bit abstract, but um, pain, energy, truth. I've said before, I've communicated before that for a man, um, there's basically three things: God, the devil, and woman. Those are the three phenomena in life. Um, so, how do we balance those three things with the other three things that I just mentioned? I'm gonna let that speak for itself. Um, but that's a that's like a primordial cosmic perspective about life. The first one is maybe a primordial experience of the earthly, and by earthly it's not just limited to this planet, but just like the earthly experience. Whereas the other one is like the cosmic experience. So the two are very much in confluence with each other. But um, spirit, heart, mind, body. Our daily discipline in those three things help guide us and our well-being. So you know what? That's going to have to be the positive note because we're going to keep it at that. So with that being said, I'm going to say all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Respect and honor to all our ancestors, all our prophets, all our sages, past and present, known and unknown. Respect and honor to His Majesty Haile Selassie and Her Majesty Waiza Amanin. Respect and support to all our progeny, from the first year of the years to the next year of the generations, door for door. One heart, one mind, one perfect love, supreme, blessed love and peace in Rastafari. Post note. I might be criticized for giving all this talk and everything else like that, and speaking perhaps less directly about the teachings of His Majesty Haile Selassie. Some of that might be attributed to the fact that we just had an event a week ago where that was the primary element. So another cause for that how I put this, it's getting late now. One other reason why I may be seen as speaking less of His Majesty Haile Selassie as I'm speaking about these things is, one, I speak about these things for a long time, for many years. Before, how do I put this? I speak about these things for a long time, as I am speaking about it now. Being within the fold of Rastafari, my knowledge about the teachings, my readings of the teachings, is comparatively modest. I'm in the trod for decades. I am in the consciousness and in following the teachings of His Majesty for decades, but in terms of earnestly studying and learning, it's comparatively recent. So the propensity, even here, I abstain from speaking very explicitly about many traditions and teachings that I regularly study. So within Rastafari, many brethren and sisters regularly, repeatedly reference His Majesty and Her Majesty, and respect to that, and acknowledge the benefit of that. The way I speak at the moment is somewhat distinct. It is appropriate to refer to the teachings of His Majesty as being a practitioner of Rastafari, but at the same time, Rastafari is a mystic spiritual awakening without specific creeds and protocols, because that's the nature of Rastafari. It is distinct from typical authoritarian type of religiosities. So, in that, there is increasing natural um, uh, ability for people to communicate and articulate in ways that are distinct from each other, um, without one being better or worse or even further authoritative than another. It is beneficial to reference the teachings. It is beneficial to specifically cite the teachings to encourage further study amongst audience. Audience plays a factor in the communication as well to be mindful of. So, all that being said, um, one thing I will share about the teachings and the examples of His Majesty Haile Selassie is the notion of citizenship and sovereignty. And when we talk about the different policies, and to be honest, there's some frustrations, to be honest, with Rastafari brethren and sister at the moment. And that's another thing that provides a pause in talking about this, because I can't talk about something without addressing some of the considerable concerns at the moment. And one of the concerns is what seems to be a lack of a sense of urgency amongst Rastafari brethren and sisterin for genuinely organizing in a sovereign way, um, and observing a lot of talk about organizing in a political way and in a mutually advantageous way, but not specifically in a sovereign way where the integrity of the teachings of His Majesty and the guidance of Rastafari from Marcus Garvey, Nyabingi, and our ancestors and prophets and sages of the diaspora and of the world guide us. So there's challenges with that, and there's challenges of being seen as a newbie and without credentials and connections and everything else like that. So thus being categorized and marginalized accordingly. So that's very understandable, but at the same time, there's less patience because there is weight in what we share here, what I and I share here. So we have to be mindful of availing ourselves to the political or the perceivably political kind of competitions amongst our brethren, our dear, holy, sacred brethren and sisters in Rastafari. As I mentioned, we do see challenges with what are identified as priorities within much of the brethren and sistermen within Rastafari in terms of, just at the very least, having yet to share a sense of urgency about sovereignty. Putting aside repatriation, and additionally, just a sense of urgency concerning sovereignty, because it is only with that foundation of sovereignty that we have the integrity of talking about anything else. And this is, again, we don't preach and tell other brother and sister what to do specifically, but just share that, and we reason. Let's talk about this. Let's chop it up. Let's reason about this. But when we look at the example of the teaching, and particularly the example of His Majesty Haile Selassie, His Majesty is not a citizen of the United States. His Majesty is not a citizen of Britain. His Majesty is not a citizen of Deutschland or Sweden or anything else. He is the sovereign of Ethiopia. And everything that he teaches is based upon that existence and that integrity of being the sovereign of Ethiopia. Even when he is in exile in England, he is the sovereign of Ethiopia. That's where his allegiance is. And that is foundational. That's where everything earthly is and begins from. When brethren and sistren are citizens of Babylon, and I don't want to, we can stay away from the terms of that are polarizing and charged and everything else, but even just plain and simple, when brethren and sistren are citizens of the United States, are citizens of Britain, Deutschland, Canada, even arguably Ethiopia, when Jamaica, when brethren and sistren are citizens of these nations, That's where brother and sister are essentially and effectively communicating allegiance. That's who has the hold on the brethren and sister in terms of potential conscription into military, and that's often implausible and unlikely. But even further, job security is based upon citizenship significantly. Income, residence, education, um, additional social services, and additionally are predicated upon citizenship. And so the brethren and sisters who are citizens of a nation have a, a high allegiance and obligation and accountability to that nation, like it or not. That's the actuality. And so when that's the actuality, the experience and the tremendous knowledge, the beautiful knowledge about the teaching of His Majesty are all categorized, are all qualified, or all like um, contextualized beneath that allegiance to the nation. Because in that allegiance to the nation, again, the nation can flex and the nation can leverage, not necessarily the government, but through the different institutions, has that leverage over the brethren. Again, whether it's house title, whether it's a job, income, and additionally, that influences even just how brethren perceive the world and perceive priorities and direct um, initiatives in terms of organizing and building allegiances with other brethren and sisters. Just even how it's perceived, it's limited within the context and the constraints of the allegiance with the nation. So, and the point is not to say one's better than the other, but just to recognize that, and to recognize how the rallying for these issues is not the priority for Rastafari. It's not the priority for any community. The priority for any community is not the issues that are being addressed at the moment. The priority for any community, white, black, yellow, brown, whatever religion, is shelter, land and shelter, secure place to live, to provide security, safety, comfort for women, children, elders. That's the primary concern for any entity. That's what His Majesty teaches, effectively as a king, a sovereign of Ethiopia. It may be less acknowledged because it may be presumed as a given, him being king and it already being established and him inheriting that type of um, um, those conditions. But that's foundational, and we have yet to see that within Rastafari, and that's understandable. But if we amidst, and we can talk about Shashamani and additionally, but we also recognize that they're with the beautiful brethren that are living in Shashamani and the beautiful things that are happening even through this day amidst all the trials and tribulations for the past 40 some odd years, 50 some odd, 40 some odd years. Um, that brethren and sisters are still there and continuing. Give thanks and praise. But we also recognize that there are limitations with that, even just in existing through the auspices of the Ethiopian government. And I personally am unaware of what the actual conditions are, what treaty is established or otherwise. But that's probably the closest that we see in all of Rastafari to genuine sovereignty. And because of that, in the estimation of I, that should be the priority of all of Rastafari is sovereignty, and that's point blank. And for those who are experiencing some proximity of that through a treaty with their own nation, whether it's Guyana, whether it's another nation in the Caribbean or otherwise, then okay, and we focus on that, and we look at, okay, now they have the credibility. That's where our authority within Rastafari as a collective is, because those are the ones who are most in a seat of Rastafarian sovereignty, just legitimately facts. Otherwise, any other brethren not in that situation is leveraged, is compromised, and that's not hate. That's just facts. Let's talk about that. Let's work on it to improve it. We got to be honest about this if we're going to do something constructive beyond it. So the sophisticated organizing um, very much is simply an imitation of the methodologies of imperialism. And even the example of His Majesty um, is, to be honest, with all due respect, is grounds for scrutiny, um, and recognizing, okay, what do we learn here? What do we imitate ourselves, and what do we avoid ourselves? Um, we can talk. We If we're going to be honest, and if we're going to be truly righteous sovereigns, let's talk about the uh, the feudal system within Ethiopia that precipitates the revolution. And what are the lessons that we glean from it? What are the facts? What happens? What is it? What's the history? What is the contemporary experience 50 years ago? And then um, what is the status at this moment? What do we learn from it? And further, those are the conversations concerning sovereignty, the responsibility and the actuality, the nitty gritty about sovereignty. Um, Through the example and the teachings of His Majesty Haile Selassie and Her Majesty Waziraman in the perfect balance. So those are part of our concerns, because we have yet to hear brethren talk about that. We hear a lot of, to be honest, this the pains to say this and say it in a public way like this, but we also recognize that secrecy is an illusion. So we're just putting it out there so that brethren can hear it as much as possible. But we see it, we see hype, and we see a number of beautiful brethren who have knowledge about how the game works, and how to utilize certain accesses and knowledges to run some hustles, and additionally, and we're not hating on that, but we're also seeing limitations within that, and it's frustrating because we also see a lot of usury within that as well. um, and we're not trying to call kinfolk out. We're not trying to make accusations. We're not trying to fuel fire between rivalries and antagonisms and whatever else. We love all brethren, and one of the best ways of being diplomatic is to have shit, to not have shit, to live a life that is very modest. And we can talk about brethren who live in the bush, and additionally, that's part of it. That's the part of the liberty and the credibility within the liberty, um, because there's less questioning about motives and less scrutiny in addition, because what's he gonna do? What's he trying to run game from? So, but often we also recognize that brethren who are living that lifestyle have less of a knowledge. Generally speaking, there's some brethren who have awesome balance of both, but generally speaking, have a less knowledge about how the conventional world works, the machinery that affects things like land grants and business investments and stuff like that. So we are encouraging reasoning amongst brethren who have strong suits in each of these respects to talk with each other um, with respect, with genuineness, and with productivity for results, focusing on sovereignty and prioritizing sovereignty. And when we see brethren organizing about the right for smoking marijuana, that's not a priority. Like, peace and blessings I mean, we are not negating the sacrament, the holy sacrament of the medicinal herb. That's not what we're doing. But again, when we look at as sovereign men, as fathers, as husbands, our priority is the protection and well-being of our families and our kinfolk. And there's too many in the fold of Rastafari that are living under threat, that are living in poverty for any political priority within Rastafari to focus on something like the legal right to smoke marijuana. What we observe is that is simply pandering to the liberal influences within Rastafari that go to the concerts, that pay for the culture to party, and as a way of providing some venting within the frustrations of convention. Guide and encourage that venting to go towards the issue of, that is less contentious and that's less controversial, um, that can gain further support from the liberal side of convention, like the issue of marijuana. But again, that's not our priority. But blessed brethren and sisters, that is not our priority. Protection and well being of our families and our kinfolk. Safe, secure, comfortable shelter, land and shelter. That is best arranged and maintained and sustained through internationally recognized sovereignty. That's a big step in many ways, but that's the best way to do it. That involves negotiation treaties, seeing where there's further receptivity towards that, building where there's already support for that, and investing ourselves in those spaces, in those physical spaces where the sovereignty, the Rastafarian sovereignty is most strong, and building our network and our infrastructure of cooperation from those strongholds of Rastafari sovereignty. And this is where we look toward the teachings of His Majesty, of how His Majesty solidifies his diplomatic relations with European monarchies. The compromises that are made militarily to remove the Italian invasion, and then the further investments and negotiations and contracts that are brokered when the land and the shelter is safe, secured, and comfortable. That's when we talk about the next stuff. That's what his teachings provide us. So as Rastafari, we have to look at where we are today, where I and I are today, physically, interspersed amidst the global imperialism, and emerging from the game of imagination that we inherit from our ancestors as just a way of coping and progressing through the nasty atrocities that we experience for generations. We need that imagination, that detachment from the actuality. We are now at a stage of progression where we have to immerse ourselves back into the actuality of geopolitics. And that imagination becomes increasingly proximate with the actuality. So that means, like, the ways we call ourselves kings, Ras, and additionally queens, and additionally princess, empress, empresses, and additionally. But we have to also recognize and acknowledge that those titles are attached and are in relationship with an actual area of land. It's not just a Disneyland title that anybody calls themselves and people just acknowledge and do accordingly. We have to bring our imagination in further proximity with our, and not just all of, not all of our imagination, but our practical imagination, our political imagination, in increasing proximity with the actuality, because we are there, we are here, we are in the position to do that, to be that, and be seen and recognized and engaged as that by the rest of the world. But we have to acknowledge the distance of the two at the moment. Letting go of our pride. It's not about pride. It's not about ego. It's not about what others' opinions about us or whatever else. It's about us. It's about I and I. It's about the divine guidance of the Most High. So, again, sovereignty, the primary priority, the foundation for building anything as community. And the earthly priority, the further priority is safe, secure, comfortable land and shelter. It doesn't even have to be ownership of land per se. It can be a treaty. It can be some kind of negotiation, but it can be just a beginning, a building, some formal edifice that is Rastafari, that is known as Rastafari, where we can receive each other, host each other, live with each other. That's foundational. And Elohim willing, when we have that, then we work to the next priorities of communication, being able to have autonomous, independent modes of communication with each other that are not reliant upon undue third-party entities and all the conditions and requirements that can be obstructive or cumbersome or otherwise. So that's the example of His Majesty in terms of building the infrastructure of airlines, hospitals, and additionally that are independent from dependency on outside entities, generally speaking. That's where we are in terms of the infrastructure that's needed at this moment as a livity around the world. The ability to communicate with each other independently, so that we don't have to worry about Wi-Fi connection. We have a satellite directly connected with each other. Don't have to pay a monthly fee, a service, or otherwise. We maintain the satellite ourselves in cooperation with another entity, perhaps another technology entity that has the expertise and working in close partnership with us. But we don't rely upon governments, we don't rely upon corporations to get the signal to each other, worrying about it being shut down or service being disconnected, or always going to have to worry about or be mindful of eavesdropping or whatever else, but having a direct line of communication with ourselves so that we can reason with each other regularly in confidence when urgencies arise, when emergencies arise, and additionally, communication. And then the next priority, transportation. Connecting with each other in physical person, visiting with each other, trading, exchanging our products and services with each other. Those are priorities. Yes, for them that smoke the herb, medicinal, we recognize that it's holy and sacred. To be honest, some brethren smoke it for beyond that purpose. It becomes excessive, just as any medicine has that potentiality of being. I'm getting a warning about my disc running over, so now I gotta be mindful of that. So let's be honest about that too. But in terms of the list of priority, herb, we need water. How about we talk about water and making clean water? Why is herb a priority and the polluted water that is lethal at this moment, why is that not a priority? We talk about herb. What about the rest of the plants? What about having access to plants and vegetation, healthy vegetation, and food, nutrition? How about making that a priority? And not even worrying about protesting governments, but just let's work together because we're providing that. Let's put the infrastructure together to support each other and trade and put the education together. Share the culture with ourselves and those who truly value it. Anyways, I'm gonna leave it at that because thing's about to shut down, and we did not make it underneath 2 hours. We are on the verge of midnight at this point. Um, that is it. Blessed love and peace.